Did you find that transition hard from being in a ring to then being in the office?
I hated it. I'll tell you why, because I wanted it on my terms.
Wrestling is life. Wrestling is life. Wrestling is life. Is wrestling.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Wrestling is Life is Wrestling with Cody Diener. I am Cody Diener and I am a professional wrestler. I'm a professional wrestling producer with TNA Wrestling. I am a professional traveling motivational speaker. I am a father to 4 children and a husband to 1 beautiful wife, and I am a podcaster. This is my podcast. If this is your first time, welcome back. And welcome to part 2 with Tommy Dreamer. So if this is your first time, then you better go back and listen to part 1 with Tommy Dreamer. If you are coming here for the first time, like I said, go back, listen to part 1. If you're back again for part 2, hey, welcome back. And before we talk about part 1 and why Tommy Dreamer was so awesome and why part 2 is going to be equally, if not more awesome, let me tell you about, speaking of awesome, my sponsors. Number 1, Rest When Dead clothing. Go to restwhendead.ca right now. Check out their entire collection, including a limited edition tactical backpack. I just got back from New Orleans for a TNA pay-per-view. No surrender. I had my new Rest When Dead backpack. I got a lot of comments on it traveling through the airport. What is this backpack? Where did you get this? Well, I told them I got it at restwhendead.ca. You should too. You can also go to Instagram, Rest When Dead Clothing. That backpack, limited edition, by the way. So go check it out now. Get it before it is gone. You can also go to ceofit.ca for all your supplement needs, both for your muscles and for your brain. They've got free shipping to Canadians for orders of over $120. Americans, $6 shipping, no matter where you are and how much you get. It's just $6. Where is that? Again, that's ceofit.ca. Ways you can support me in this podcast other than just supporting my sponsors, which I highly suggest that you do. Thank you very much. You can support me by rating and reviewing and subscribing to this podcast on whatever platform you are listening or watching this on right now. Leave a comment on YouTube. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Leave a review and follow me on Spotify. It helps the algorithm and helps more people learn about this show. Speaking of the show, if you want episodes early and ad-free, if you don't even, if there's people out there right now that supported me that didn't have to wait to this week to listen to part 2 with Tommy Dreamer. If you're a patron over at patreon.com/Cody Diener, then you already listened to today's show early and ad-free, as well as 2 bonus stories. That's right, not just 1, but 2 bonus stories from Tommy Dreamer. And let me tell you, they are doozies. One is an insane, wild story that has to do with ECW original Balls Mahoney. And the second one, well, just go check it out. Just go check it out. It's hilarious and it's amazing. It's awesome. And it's a story only like Tommy Dreamer can tell. Where do you go listen to that or watch that? Both video and audio, by the way. I'll tell you where. Patreon.com/Cody Diener. Get yourself a free trial. Check it out. Look at all the content I got over there. And if you enjoy it during the free trial, consider being a full-time supporter. Other ways you can support is by going to prowrestlingtees.com/Cody Diener or go to cameo.com/Cody Diener. Get yourself a personal cameo for yourself or a friend or family member right now. All right, shilling done. Let's start with shilling today's guest, Tommy Dreamer. Last week, we heard a never before heard behind the scenes story that was pretty wild about a childhood hero of mine, Roddy Piper, that surprised a lot of people and was just so insightful, so crazy, so insane. I love wrestling so much. I love stories. And if it's about a legend like Roddy Piper, I'm on the edge of my seat, which I was last week with that story. Then Tommy let me do a little storytelling because we together talked about our first time interacting with one another when he was working in talent relations with WWE and I was trying to get a job. And I talked about speaking to Tommy Dreamer for the first time on the phone. I was in university. I got my very first tryout match with WWE because Tommy Dreamer watched a VHS tape that I sent into the office, and he liked it, and he called me. He talked to me on the phone. He was honest, he was open, and he was awesome. So that was my very first interaction with Tommy Dreamer. I've had many more since then, and every time I interact with Tommy, I just love listening to his stories, including the story he was beginning to tell at the end of last week's episode, which was he was empathizing with me sending in my videotape and my 8x10 to the WWE, trying to get a job. And he then started to talk about his similar experience the first time he sent a promotional package into the WWF at the time, and getting this letter in the mail and opening it up and seeing he was getting a letter from the WWF and thinking, oh my God, there's a contract with the WWF in here. This is it. This is the moment. And then I ended part one. So we're going to leave right there. We're not going to leave right there. We're going to pick up right there where we left off last week with this envelope that Tommy Dreamer opens and what that meant for his life moving forward. He has done a lot in his life in professional wrestling, both on screen as an in-ring performer and a lot backstage. There are so many people's lives, including my own, that have been affected in an extremely positive way because of Tommy Dreamer. The names are endless, and we'll touch on this here in part two. He hired so many of the stars that you see on television today, got their big break because Tommy Dreamer saw something in them and was willing to give them an opportunity and a chance to shine on the big stage, which they probably maybe never would have got if it wasn't for Tommy Dreamer. So we're talking about a man who not just has had an amazing wrestling career, but has changed the lives of so many people. So what better than to have Tommy Dreamer on Wrestling is Life is Wrestling, a guy that's just changed so many people's lives. And before we jump into part two, speaking of changing people's lives, I shared a story at the end of last week's episode on my outro about a young boy named Hunter. And I had some people reach out to me regarding that story. And I've decided I want to share another story kind of regarding that same little boy, but another young man that has affected me in my life and my journey as a professional speaker. But I'm going to share that at the end of today's episode. So stick around to the end to hear another life story of my travels on the road, both as a wrestler and a speaker. It's definitely a story that involves this clashing of wrestling and my life. Stick around for that story at the end, but you don't got to stick around much longer because we're going to start right now with part two with ECW Original. Let's sit under the story time tree with Tommy Dreamer.
My generation was, I'm a mark. I got to be kept out of the business. And then also like, we don't want your type in the business, or even if you come into the business, like I was ingrained forever, dude, like forever. Once you're a wrestler, you don't ever go to see wrestling. You know, there's the big debate now. Don't take the picture, take the picture.
Right.
And, you know, there was people who they would try to break you down to leave the industry instead of encourage you and build you up. And I always kind of try to do the, you know, hey, I get it. Not everyone's going to make it, but like there's the whys, like you said. I remember when my first ever tape that I sent to the WWE, and I received a letter in the mail, and I remember like seeing that letterhead, and I was like, oh my God, and like why and like I'm in my head like I have a contract in this envelope right now. And I remember opening it and reading it, and then I was like, thank you for your interest in WWE World Wrestling Federation. We are currently not interested in you. And I was just like, oh. But it didn't say because your VCR tape, you sucked, you did this, you did that. They just told me
Mhm.
nothing. We are not interested in your services. That's what it said.
Right.
And I was like, why? I'm at that time I was 6'3". I was in really good shape. I was really good looking. What don't you like about me? And without, like, nobody gave me feedback. But then it also
Yeah.
came to ECW with Paul, because Paul always gave us all the feedback. And to the point of, like, don't do this, do this. Your outfit sucks. Change this, do that. And, like, at times, like, I mean, I know I've talked to you. I've also known you've heard me talk to people. Like, then, like, I do the same thing. Because
Yep.
also, like, when I was in WWE, I would basically go and I would just always hit my time. I was probably perhaps the easiest wrestler to manage, agent wise. And I'd come in the back curtain, I was anything, like, nope, you did perfect. And I was like, nothing. And then they were like, no, you did great. You hit your time. Match was good. People were into it, blah, 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 blah. And it was always like, no, you're fine. Then I'd always see them talking to the other people. And I hated that. I'd always like, if you group all of us together, hey, and I'd done it too. This is where you were perfect, but this person wasn't. Or we don't care about you. I care about this person. And because it's this person's time. Just tell me that to my face.
Yes.
And to one point, they were like, because I didn't make Vince mad because I didn't go over my time. So he didn't care.
Yeah.
And I was just like, okay. And I remember one guy coming in the back, and again, I'm very different. Like, no, you were perfect. And I literally go, if all my matches are perfect, how come I'm not your champion? And everything froze.
Yeah.
And I was just like, okay, then what? And then, like, or even like, dude, my first day when I'm wrestling Brock Lesnar, and I have a great match with Brock Lesnar. And I love working Brock Lesnar. And we do this whole thing. The finish, I pick him up for the Death Valley Driver, but he gives me elbow. He's too big. Picks me up. And before that, he went for the F5, and I landed on my feet, and I picked him up. And we have this great match. Everyone's like, we love it. And then they come back, and, like, the people were going nuts. Brock Lesnar was completely unknown. It was like you said, it was a dark match. Nobody knew who this, but he was a beast. And they were like, the match was great, but you can't pick up Brock Lesnar. And I was like, what are you talking about? And they're like, well, you can't pick him up. And I was like, I just picked him up. They're like, no, well, you can't pick him up. And I'm like, I literally, when you pick somebody up for a Death Valley Driver, if they jump, it's actually harder. I literally picked this man up and I carried him on my shoulders. And like, well, like, you can't do that. And I was like, if you're telling me physically I can't do that, I just prove you wrong, and I have a problem with this. If you're telling me you don't want me to pick him up because you're pushing him and not pushing me, just tell me that, and I'm fine with it. And he goes, we don't want you to pick him up because we're going to push him, and we don't want him to get off his feet like that. Okay, great. Yeah. Tell me that. Don't tell me I physically can't pick somebody up. So that's kind of why I'm always like that. Like, I don't need to, like, we care about him. We don't care about you. And I tell that even when people are extras, I will be like, hey, everybody has done this. And I go, and one time, hopefully you'll be the person and working with somebody and you'll remember this. And I was like, just go out there and do your job. We're telling you just to get beat up. And even the best part about now in TNA, I go, you see that guy over there? I go, he wants the best workers to do that. You know why? Because that's what he did. And now he's the third most influential man in wrestling. And that's Scott D'Amore. And he will, like, that's how he first got his break. And he doesn't want crappy wrestlers doing this. He wants good wrestlers that are going to go make the other guy look good. And then they're going to keep on saying, well, we're going to use this. Or, hey, remember that person who did, like, that good business? Maybe we give that person something.
Yes.
And I was like, and that's the cycle of the game.
Yes. I've had that same conversations with extras. I've taken your view on that, and like, and also, like you said, being in a position where you just want people to be honest. Like, I'm talking, I go, hey man, today's not your day to to go out there and hit all your moves. Today's your day. You're taking all the moves, but you have to realize that there's people here like a Tommy Dreamer, like a Scott D'Amore, that know this business inside and out, and that's going to be how you're going to get over today, not with your fancy move. You're going to get over today by making that guy look good. And these people here know that. The people that are running this ship understand that and know that. And it also, what you said reminded me of my actual first dark match with the WWE, where I wrestled Muhammad Hassan, who was very green, and Arn Anderson was helping put the match together, and then the agent, and we come to the back right through the curtain, and he looks at Muhammad Hassan and goes, "You need to say thank you to that young man right there. You see that guy right there, Cody? Go shake his hand right now." So he comes over, shakes my hand, and goes, "You need to thank Cody for making you look so awesome. He sold everything that you did. He put everything over. He bumped his ass off. He made you look like $1 million, and you didn't do any of that for him. Shake his hand." So Muhammad, "Oh, thank you, Cody." And I go, "Oh, thank you, Arn, sir. Is there anything that you have for me?" He goes, "No, you were awesome, kid." I'm like, "Oh, thanks." And then he turns his back. He sits down with Muhammad Hassan and spends the next 20 minutes talking to him as I'm just standing there going,
right.
Like, what about me over here?
Yeah.
And then that was one of my first lessons of realizing, oh, I'm not today. This isn't my day. This isn't about me. That guy's under contract. They're trying to make him better. And even though I'm really good, it doesn't actually matter in this scenario. So what you just saying, like you appreciate when people will just tell you that beforehand, that you always appreciated that. And there's moments like that too, where I've just learned, hey, I've been in those positions. I'm always going to try to help other people. If I get to be in a position where I can avoid somebody feeling that way, I'll do it.
Yep. It's funny too. Jimmy Yang, I wrestled him on on Heat.
Mm-hmm.
There was one year where I had 4 victories on Heat, and they were all against locals.
Yeah.
I couldn't beat anyone on the roster, but I was really good against those locals. And he took one of the best DDTs, and I came in the back, and he was, under contract before with Johnny and WCW, John Laurinaitis. And John goes, "How was he?" I go, "You should hire him. He took one of the best DDTs I ever did." And he was just like, "All right." And then he got hired.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Oh,
cool.
That's awesome. So you mentioned earlier, you were talking about, and some people know this and some people won't. There's some people that aren't even wrestling fans that are listening to this and are just listening to these stories and going, "This is insane." But you talked about being in the office, and you worked in talent relations, and you also worked in hiring extras and doing those things. How did that even come about? Was it because of your experience in ECW, having to do multiple jobs, that kind of built up your resume to even be able to be put in that position? Or how the hell does Tommy Dreamer, this, solid performer that's always does the good job and is easily agented, like you said, all of a sudden work for a corporation and put a tie on?
Number one, I had a college education. And that was the deal I made with my parents.
I made that same deal.
They would support me in wrestling as long as I finished college. Never thought I'd ever have to use my college education, but they would always say, "Dreamer has a college education," like in the office. And Johnny would be like, even when we're looking at my replacements, when I was going back to full-time in WWE's version of ECW. "Well, what about this guy? He's got a college education." So like, this is, that was one. And then I guess this was during the time where JR was being replaced by Johnny, and, Johnny wanted, his people in there. And plus, I guess I always had a feel for the industry and hired so many people throughout it, like from ECW, or just and also I think it has to do with how I've been like you said, I'll do whatever it takes to get, the job done. ECW, I did everything. Or like with Paul, I took direction, as well as then it's like, hey, we got, we out of necessity. And you need people like that who they got to step up out of necessity.
Right. Yeah. Did you find that transition hard from being in a ring to then being in the office?
I hated it. I'll tell you why, because I wanted it on my terms. And you know this because wrestling is my life. I love wrestling. I love performing. I also like now, if I see somebody that I'm interested in, or if I could help out in some sort of way, I like to always be hands-on with the person. I realized, my role in ECW was, you worked with me. I was like, this person has it. They're going to move on to bigger and better. I'm still going to be that thing. Kind of like what Jake the Snake was in WWE. Kind of like pattern myself like that. Didn't need a title. Didn't need any of that stuff. WWE, the first time, a little different because you're chasing that, dream, that dangling carrot. Leave the office. Once I worked in the office, though, it gave me such a better sense of, it's not always us versus them, meaning the office versus the boys. I hated it because they were like, well, creative has nothing for you. There was no, the business had busted. And when you tell me creative has nothing for me, I would be like, I could literally think of 10 things creative can do with me. That's, you don't want to invest in me no more. I get it, but I didn't get that then. And I was like most people. I mean, I've said this before, but I was 29 when ECW went out of business. And then I signed a 3-year deal with WWE. I wrestled there for 3 years. So I'm in my early 30s. And then they put me in the office. And I just still I wish I could have had a bigger run in WWE and then transitioned into the office. The other part of it, they would always be like, well, you can't do both. You can't work in the office and you can't wrestle. And I'm like, why? That's all I did in ECW. That's all I did. Even when I went back to WWE, I did both. Or even I was like, hey, I wrote, produced, wrestled in ECW One Night Stand 2005. Did I miss any of my work? No. I do this. This is all I've been doing. Or for the last how many years in TNA, this is what I do. I like to do this, and I'm good at it. So let me just do it.
I want to take a pause from this conversation now to tell you about a very special and exclusive release happening over at restwhendead.ca. And that is the release of the Jesse Scott Rest When Dead Fighting Spirit t-shirt. Jesse Scott is not just a friend or a colleague of Rest When Dead, but he's truly a member of the Rest When Dead family. He's been a friend of the president of Rest When Dead, Aaron York, since high school. He was the very first person to support Rest When Dead with the very first online order. The first online customer for Rest When Dead was Jesse Scott. But his connection to Rest When Dead goes deeper than that. He is my friend and was there the very first day that I started wrestling school. I started wrestling school because Jesse Scott decided to start a wrestling school and start a wrestling promotion called Fighting Spirit Pro Wrestling. He created a platform for individuals like myself, Eric Young, Sean Spears, and fellow Rest When Dead athlete Crazy Steve. None of us would be where we are today in the wrestling industry if it wasn't for wrestling promoter and fellow wrestler and Rest When Dead family member Jesse Scott. But Jesse Scott has a very different, unique, and difficult challenge ahead of him right now, because Jesse Scott has recently been diagnosed with cancer. Jesse Scott has always been someone who displays a fighting spirit both in and out of the ring, and we know that he will display that same fighting spirit for the challenge that he has ahead of him. And he's going to need to show that fighting spirit because he is surrounded by a beautiful family. He has a wonderful wife, and he's also the father to 3 young boys. And in light of the challenges that are posed by Jesse's new circumstances and his wife's decision to prioritize time at home with Jesse and the kids, Rest When Dead is proud to introduce the Jesse Scott Fighting Spirit signature tee. Rest When Dead commits to donating 100% of the profits from this shirt to Jesse and his family to aid with their expenses with this challenge that is ahead of him. Furthermore, 50% of the profits from any additional Rest When Dead merchandise that's purchased in conjunction with the new Jesse Scott signature shirt will also be allocated to support Jesse and his family. So head on over to restwhendead.ca and consider supporting an amazing family man and a proud member of the Rest When Dead family, Jesse Scott.
I learned a lot from that, which I'm very, very grateful for. I also, again, got to hire so many men and women that have followed their dreams. But then I also got to learn like the business, a bigger business side of things, as well as, hey, like you said, like, how am I having these conversations with, Tommy Dreamer? How am I in the office next door to Vince McMahon? How am I having lunch with Vince? Vince calls me into his office. Hey, what do you think? And I'm having these conversations with Vince McMahon. And, or that I'm a president of the WWE. Like, how does this happen? And I'm not even 35.
Yes. What did your parents think of that? Were your parents proud of that or happy of that? Or
they could care less. They just, I had very, very supportive parents. My parents hated ECW because I would be coming home. Listen, you'll always be, my mom always said this, you'll always be my baby. And I'd have I'd wear hats so she couldn't see the gig marks and scars on my head, or why do you have a Band-Aid on your head? How come you didn't get stitches? Or black eyes, or all that stuff. I remember that when I got caned by the Sandman, like I slept at home after that. And there's at times your mother is going to see her son being brutalized, or worse, she'll see me crossing the hall in a towel because I had to take a shower, or there was parts of my body I couldn't put alcohol on, or in my house it was witch hazel, or bacitration, and I had open bruises, like you can't hide those.
Nope.
And my mom would see all these things, or like the time I got thrown in front of a bus, and or she comes home.
I have to isolate that phrase right there.
That's fine.
I gotta isolate that and make that the time you got thrown in front of a bus.
And I'm in my backyard of the place where I used to play wiffle ball, and I have Terry Funk's branding iron, and I'm blowing fireballs in my backyard because I want to learn how to blow a fireball.
Oh God!
All right, I'll quickly tell my.
Wrestling is so crazy.
EC Tommy Dreamer, Pit Bulls versus Bruise Brothers, Brian Lee. We're fighting on Queens Boulevard. We take the fight outside. Everyone's, chanting ECW. All of a sudden, here comes a double-decker bus. And middle of Queens Boulevard, which is a very active road, I tell Brian Lee, throw me in it. And he goes, what? I go, throw me into it. And this is a moving bus. I hit the side of it. I bang off the side. You have no clue how much your body shoots away when you get hit by a bus doing by.
No, I don't. I have no idea.
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
You have no clue, in case you need to edit it. You have no clue how your body gets thrown when you're hit by a bus between 15, 20 miles an hour. I roll a couple times on the middle of Queens Boulevard. There's hundreds of people outside, and there's no ECW chance. And there was, at that same time, the Pitbulls like went up and started fighting and throwing the Bruise Brothers into vans. Brian Lee puts his foot on my throat and he's like, "You dumb motherfucker, you just threw yourself into a bus and nobody saw it." The cameraman never even went and saw it.
Oh God.
So he just picks me up and we're laughing, whatever. So we do all this crazy stuff outside, bring the fight back into the building, have the match, whatever. The next couple of days, this is when Rudy Giuliani was the mayor. The mayor's office is calling because we destroyed 2 city benches and 2 city trucks. And they're looking for Tommy Dreamer and I'm on the phone. I'm like, "I will get to the bottom of this, sir." It was Giuliani's people. So anyway, here's the whole why my parents like hated it. So my mom, my grandmother's brother, so he'd be my great uncle Frank, and his wife, Aunt Eileen, are driving down Queens Boulevard and they see me get thrown into a bus.
Oh God.
Now, no cell phones.
No.
And they can't get to me because of all these people. So they call my grandparents and they say, "We saw Tommy get hit by a bus and we know it's Tommy." Then my grandparents call my house and it's my parents, and they're like, "Aunt Eileen, Uncle Frank, they saw Tommy get hit by a bus and there was a wrestling show," whatever. I go out that night afterwards. I come home, it's like 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. And no matter what happens in your life, when you still revert to a kid who knows he's going to be in trouble, I'll never forget rounding the curb to my block and I see the lights are on, every light. And I'm like, something's up. So I park my car. As soon as I get out of the car, my mother's there. "What happened? What happened?" And my father's there. "We heard you got hit by a bus." And I was like, "Oh, yeah. Well, I kind of did, but it was like in wrestling." "I hate this stuff. Forget it." Just goes right back upstairs. It's like 4 a.m. Right? And then my father, who was very, very calm and nice like me, and he's just like, "Okay, tell me what happened." I was like, "Oh, wrestling, and then there was a bus and I got thrown into it." He's like, "Could you please?" And then he tells me the whole story. He's like, "The whole family's been worried, sick about you. Can you please not get thrown in front of a bus in this wrestling?" And I was like, "Okay, Dad, I won't."
Oh man. So normally when someone tells a story in the past, when I talk to some wrestlers, I'm like, what I like to try to do is like pull a life lesson out of that story for our listeners, because wrestling is life, is wrestling. And I have no fucking idea what life lesson to pull out of that story.
Don't throw yourself in front of a bus.
Yes, there it is. There it is. That's a life lesson there. I love this because I have a whole page of questions, and I think I've asked 0 of them. I've just been.
We'll do another episode of your outline.
Yeah, I love
We're almost hitting that hour mark.
Yeah, man. One thing I am curious about though is in terms of like thinking of life situations and lessons. I wanted to ask you your experience in when the WWE brought back ECW and did the WWE version of it. What did that experience teach you? Because you had this thing that you loved so much, and I know I've heard you talk about it. You've talked about it to me personally. I've heard you talk about it publicly. And then this corporation that you're also involved in, brings this thing back and everything that happened with that. Did that what was a takeaway or something that kind of taught you going through that WWE bringing back ECW?
There's, it always spun the negative because of how strong the original ECW was. But like, hey, if it wasn't for that ECW, if it wasn't for Dusty Rhodes, I would have never made it to WrestleMania, right? And a lot of good things did come out of that. And now I am experiencing, there's a whole generation of people who grew up watching that version of ECW.
Right.
What I guess it taught me the most is like, I really at the time equated it to divorce and remarriage.
Interesting. Yeah.
ECW was your child got divorced. Your significant other got remarried. You can control some of the circumstances, but it's no longer yours to control.
Interesting
and everything
analogy.
has to be for a fight, and everything has to be, if it's not your way, cool, but guess what? It's not really yours anymore.
Yeah.
And like, if there was visitation rights, I can't go see my kid when I want to see it today. So I looked at it that way, not that it was, but then also, like I said, later on, I looked at it as the positives.
Yeah.
For myself, never would have got to WrestleMania. I got to make it to WrestleMania in front of my wife and my kids, and it was an amazing time. Plus, I was hanging out with 4 very, very close friends of mine in Rob Van Dam, Sabu, and Sandman. We all made it together.
That's
I got
cool.
my biggest wrestling paycheck from that night. When it was over, I was like, wasn't what I was cracked up to be. But again, to put it in perspective, like my whole life I don't want to say I was trying to get to that moment, because like once I settled into ECW, like if ECW was still around, I would probably still be there. But I was so content in that, and there was other bigger moments for me than that WrestleMania. But then I realized, oh wait, you get paid for this, to do this? I want to be in more.
Yeah.
So I mean, those are the goods and the bads. Or then like, hey, CM Punk, a guy I hired, got to debut in that thing called ECW, then got that push through Paul Heyman. Kofi Kingston got in that, Sheamus got in that thing called ECW.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of like good stuff that came out of it. And it happened. And honestly, like, again, like so many things, another, like I said, full circle moments. Dusty Rhodes, my hero. The reason I get into professional wrestling, he has to push to keep my match on WrestleMania, because at one point it was canceled, because he knew how much it meant to me, and he knew also like that was his ECW like angle, that was his baby. And here's this guy who was so influential for me, and he was fighting for me. And
that's awesome.
Coming off of, like, there were so many guys who I helped hire Monty Brown. That was, me and Johnny. I hired Pope. I hired Stryker. I hired Kevin Thorne. So all these people that I was involved with when I was the boss of OVW, I'm now wrestling on the biggest stage of, the game. So it was like stuff like that, where everything is full circle in life. And, I guess that's a good life lesson right there.
Yeah. Because life is wrestling for sure. I want to be mindful of your time, and I told you we'd talk for about an hour. I could talk to you easily for another hour. I've done this
We'll do a part 1 and a part 2. How about that?
This felt very much like a fun locker room.
Normally how we talk.
Hang. Yeah. Yes, I just listen to stories and going back and forth. So that's what my listeners got today. Just listening to some stories back and forth and some fun times. I because I am the ultimate worker, you're gonna really much appreciate this. I want to see if you can stick around for like 2 more minutes because
Sure.
I'm gonna hit the stop button on the free version of the podcast and then go over to my Patreon at
Oh, yeah.
patreon.com/Cody Diener and I like
Patreon,
to
that
throw
shit up.
yeah. I like to put up a bonus story that's just exclusive to my patrons that are supporting me through there, and we'll give them an exclusive a Tommy Dreamer story over there. I got to a lot. I didn't get to a lot of things that I kind of wanted to ask you about. I know there's a lot of like wild ECW stories. I think one of the things that I think I want to end on with a tease for my Patreon. It's a story that I know you have told, but maybe you could give like a different version of it or a Cole's Notes version of it because I think it fits with Wrestling is Life is Wrestling, where it really shows your love of wrestling so much. An idea you had an idea for ECW. I think that it involved you getting shot. Is this a thing?
That was an angle. That wasn't at
That-
Super Bowl. Super Bowl's not
Okay,
big enough draw, bro. That was at
okay,
I wanted to get shot at the ECW arena. Sure.
Okay.
I'd rather
So
tell a Balls Mahoney story, but I'll tell two. How about that?
Oh, you want to tell a Balls Mahoney story? Because
Just for the
that would be
Patreon.
fantastic.
We'll tell
Okay.
two Balls Mahoney's. We'll tell my getting shot story, and we'll tell Balls Mahoney story.
Oh my god. Okay. I know why I thought that. It's because it's my didn't Brian Pillman wanted to handcuff himself naked on the Super Bowl onto a field goal post. Did you hear that?
I've heard something like that.
Okay, that was that. I was mixing two stories together. He would have done it. The reason I connect those two is because it's in my brain. Is because Brian Pillman was so crazy about the business that he was willing to do anything to get over, and you wanting to get shot is in the same vein of I'm willing to do anything for this business to make something work and get it over. So we'll do that just for the patrons. We'll head on over there. We'll hit the stop button here on the free version, and I'll end the free version by saying thank you for doing this, Tommy, and I love you very much.
I love you too, buddy.
That's going to do it for another episode of Wrestling is Life is Wrestling with Cody Diener and with my friend and now yours, Tommy Dreamer. Story time with Tommy. You gotta love story time with Tommy. I could just sit under the story time tree and just listen to Tommy Dreamer tell stories for hours. And I literally have. I have on a lot of the TNA loops that I do, the television tapings and pay-per-views. I get a chance to just sit and relax and hang out with the roster. Something that's really cool about TNA is the roster just gets together and hangs out and winds down after a long TV taping, and everyone sits down and, reflects on the day and how awesome things went and kind of really propping one another up and telling people how awesome their matches were, segments or interviews or whatever it may be. And Tommy's there at some point, has a really cool story from the past to share with the wrestlers. And I just love it. I could do it forever. And I'm really glad and happy that Tommy was willing to come on the show and share some of those stories that I've got to hear before, but share them with you. Hopefully you got something out of it. I think this project that I've started is something that if we just stop and listen to people's stories, we can learn from them, and everybody's going to get something different from these stories. So I know if that is you, hit me up at Cody Diener and let me know what story really affected you here this week and maybe helped you in some way, because that's one thing that I'm getting is even though some of these stories are just funny and entertaining, they're that, but they're also more than that. They're inspiring to a lot of people, or motivating in some way, and everybody gets something else out of them. So I love hearing from my fans. So hit me up at Cody Diener. Let me know what you think of today's episode, as well as this project as a whole, and share it with your friends. Let them know that this project is all around the world on Apple Podcast, on Spotify, or at Cody Diener Podcast on YouTube. Leave me a comment. I read them all and I reply to as many as I can. So thank you for the support. Other ways you can support, like I said at the top of the show, is patreon.com. You heard us there at the end of this episode. Tommy saying he's going to give us 2 stories. Well, he did. Thank you, Tommy, for giving us 2 bonus stories. You are not going to get those for free. Well, actually, I'm lying right now. Yeah, you are, because you can start a free trial over at patreon.com/Cody Diener. You can hear those 2 bonus stories for free, as well as a bonus story from every single one of my past guests, whether that's my brother Big Con or from Jessica Havoc, Rosemary, former TNA champion Josh Alexander, my good buddy who did a 3-parter with me, Crazy Steve, or the guy that we all believe in, Joe Hendry, all these people that I have spoke to, Sean Spears, man, the list goes on and on and on. I can continue with all my past guests. They've all given me bonus stories. Where are you going to get those bonus stories? The only place to get them is at patreon.com/Cody Diener. If you're one of those people that likes to watch them, not just listen to them. You can watch them. They are, the video of every bonus story is up at patreon.com/Cody Diener. If you're a promoter and you want to bring me to your wrestling show, I'm doing indies. I'm not just exclusive to TNA Wrestling, even though I love being a member of the TNA roster, as well as someone that helps out backstage with producing matches. As a producer, I love to share my knowledge of wrestling and my love of wrestling on the independent scene, where some of the best wrestling in the world is happening in these small little Legion halls and bingo halls across the nation that only the people in that building are going to experience for the night. Man, I love it. Whether it's a small Legion hall show somewhere or a big TNA pay-per-view, I love wrestling through and through, no matter where it is. If you want to book me for your wrestling show, hit me up. Book Cody at CodyDiener.com. That's book Cody at CodyDiener.com. And let's talk about how I can spread my love of wrestling with your fans and with your roster today on any independent wrestling show that you are running. We're talking about stories here, and I told you at the beginning of the show that I have a story that I want to share in my travels as a professional speaker. And it really is about how wrestling and life kind of collide in a special way. You can head on over to my social media, my speaking social media that I haven't hyped a lot on this show. It's at Chris Gray Speaks. That's Gray with an A. So Chris Gray Speaks. You can also go to chrisgrayspeaks.com and learn more about my speaking journey as I travel across North America, sharing my story and using my story to teach valuable life principles to young people. But this is a story about Hunter. Last week, I shared that I was on a tour in Peterborough, Ontario, and I met this young boy named Hunter. But I also mentioned in passing with that story that there was another young boy that has affected my life in a really cool way, and that is Hunter, but a different Hunter. Go to my social media at Chris Gray Speaks right now, and you can see I recently posted a picture of me up on a stage, a big stage in front of hundreds of kids, with a picture up on the screen behind me of a young boy, and that young boy's name is Hunter. And it's just a selfie that I took with this young boy that I met at a wrestling show. I met him at a show, and I noticed he had cowboy boots on. So I was wearing cowboy boots at the time, so we started comparing our wicked awesome cowboy boots together. I asked him his name. He said Hunter. We took a selfie together. We chatted about all his favorite wrestlers. I chatted about all of my favorite wrestlers, and we just had a great time. And as I was taking that selfie, I had the privilege of meeting his dad, whose name was Jeff. And from that day on, I struck up a friendship with both Hunter and Jeff. They would come to all the wrestling shows, and the shows that we were going to at this time and are still happening to this day are a company called Pro Wrestling Eclipse based out of Oshawa, Ontario. I struck up a friendship with Hunter and Jeff. They started coming to all the shows, and I looked forward to seeing Hunter and Jeff at every show. But why is this picture special that I'm telling you about to go look at Chris Gray Speaks? Well, if you look at the picture closely, you'll see that I'm up on stage talking, And to the right of the screen up on that stage is a banner that says Kiwanis Club of Peterborough. The cool thing about that picture is the man taking that picture of me up on stage is former Kiwanis Club of Peterborough president, Jeff. Jeff, the same man who was Hunter's father. That moment of me on stage was made possible by Hunter's dad, Jeff. This is a story of why kindness is cool. The fact that I took the time out of my day just to say hi to this kid and take a selfie with him, it started a friendship with Jeff. Jeff saw the kindness that I was spreading throughout schools. He partnered with the Kiwanis Club of Peterborough to sponsor me to spread that kindness all across the school boards within Peterborough, Ontario, and he joined me on the tours. I was up on that stage spreading positivity to young people because of Jeff and the moment of me meeting Hunter. This is why I say it's so important to just be kind. You never know what small act of kindness is going to lead to for yourself and for somebody else. And I'm not saying that you should be kind because it's going to lead to some cool moment for yourself. But the neat thing about it is that small act of kindness allowed me to not just make a friend in Hunter, but to make a friend in Jeff, and then also partner with an amazing organization called the Kiwanis Club that's all about spreading positivity and kindness in their community. So you can see when you're one small act of kindness, you never know how far that's going to spread. I'm now partnering with a organization that literally is all about spreading kindness worldwide, and I made a few friends along the way. So I just wanted to share that with you because this podcast is about sharing positivity and positive stories. I've said this before, but I'll say it again. I know there's a lot of wrestling podcasts out there. I know there's a lot of life podcasts out there. And especially within the wrestling podcast genre, there's some people that make a living, literally a living, doing a podcast where they just shovel dirt. They talk about negative things and they talk about negative news or negative reviews of shows. And then they just really focus on negativity because human nature, people are attracted to that. And everybody starts jumping on the negative story and the negativity, and it just kind of grows. And a lot of people are drawn to that. It's just human nature. I get it. But that is not what this show is. This show is all about positivity. And if I can spread some positive stories, then I'm going to do that. So I wanted to just share that positive story with you guys here at the end of the show, just because I wanted to, because I want to spread some love. I want to spread some kindness, and I want to hopefully inspire somebody else to do the same. So be nice to somebody today, spread some positivity, and I hope that you will join me here next week, because next week's guest is... Oh, just like this past 2 weeks, I haven't had any shows where I just kind of sit under the story time tree. We just tell stories. We're going to shift gears next week with another guest that we are going to do a deep, deep dive on what is the true essence of life. I wanted to have this guest on my show since the very first day I decided to do Wrestling is Life is Wrestling, because this guy thinks about life in a super unique way, in a way that I've got to sit down and chat with him before. And every time I chat with this guy, it gives me like a different perspective on what life is really all about. And he happens to be involved in professional wrestling for the same amount of time I have, like almost a quarter of a century. That's all I'm going to tell you. That's my teaser. But you want to go on a deep, deep dive on what life really means? Whew, join us for the first of a two-parter with my guest for the next 2 weeks. It's going to be awesome. If you don't want to wait till next Thursday, head on over to patreon.com/Cody Diener. Like I said, support the podcast. Be a free trial member over at patreon.com/Cody Diener, and you can get part 1 and 2 with next week's guest early and ad-free. I'll be putting up the show this weekend over at my Patreon. But if you don't want to do that, that's okay. Maybe I'll convince you one of these times. to go to patreon.com/CodyDiener. If I say patreon.com/CodyDiener enough, maybe you'll just want to stop hearing me say it and you want to see it yourself. So go to patreon.com/CodyDiener and you'll do a free trial. But if not, I'll see you next week where we will have a new guest. And let me tell you, with this new guest, we are going to learn the same thing that we learn every week. And that's this: wrestling is life is wrestling. We'll see you next week, guys.
Wrestling is life. Wrestling is life. Wrestling is life is wrestling.